Thank you for joining us today for our SmithRx Full Disclosure webinar. Today we will be going through an X-ray for your PBM contract, CAA Readiness and Alignment Made Easy. I'm Alyssa Johnson. I'm the Senior Director of Clinical Strategy at SmithRx, and I'm excited to have Steve Ditto and Alan Pinner join us today. So we'll start with some brief introductions. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, happy to, Alyssa, and very pleased to be joining you today. So I'm Steve Ditto. I've been in healthcare forever, a little more than 30 years, a lot of focus on how do you use analytics, digital health to deliver higher quality, more cost-effective care. And over the last few years, I've really focused that on compliance and fiduciary obligations, and also how to take a real patient advocacy focus on that so that ultimately you're delivering higher quality and more cost-effective care. I've been leading an effort at the Nautilus Health Institute around their PBM project. Have built a variety of tools and capabilities, and part of what we'll be talking about today is contract X-ray, taking a look at your contract and making sure that it's positioned so that you can meet your fiduciary obligations.
And Alan Pinner is a recurring guest. Always excited to hear his expertise and insights on the industry. If you'll give an intro, Alan.
Yeah, thank you, Alyssa. Very happy to be on Full Disclosure again with you and to talk more about the Nautilus Health Initiative and the projects that we've been working on. Really excited to be here with Steve and to hear more from him about the work that we've been doing together. And, you know, it's exciting to find other folks within the industry that are, have the same values and desires to fix a conflicted healthcare system, especially around pharmacy benefits. So really excited to kick off the conversation.
Great. So by way of agenda, we're going to start with why we're all here. If PBM contracts were straightforward, we wouldn't be having this discussion. So first we'll go through with what's wrong with PBM contracts so that then you can have actionable tools for transparency. And Steve's going to go over some really great examples and resources, including we'll be able to go through a sneak peek at SmithRx's scorecard as well. And then we'll wrap up. Starting out, we'll go through what's wrong with the PBM contracts. I'm really interested to hear some more updates because I know, Steve, you're an expert in this area and get visibility to a lot. With all the market changes and more plan lawsuits putting the spotlight on employer fiduciary duties, what's the biggest legal risk of self-insured employers that they're facing right now? And how that impacts their relationship with their PBM?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as probably everybody is aware, there've been a number of different lawsuits out there with Johnson & Johnson and Wells Fargo and JP Morgan Chase and others. And the real focus is, did they breach their fiduciary duties in the way that they both chose and managed their PBM contracts? And all of those lawsuits are having trouble, in all honesty, with what the lawyers call standing, which really means that the person who brought the lawsuit, did they really suffer the harm in order to be able to justify the lawsuit? And so that's always something that happens in the law, and that's working through the process. But I think the bigger picture, and if you step back for a second, is what does it really take for an employee to be so dissatisfied with their benefits that they would actually sue their employer? And I think that's the big question. And so is the employer really doing the right thing? And the right thing under ERISA and just fiduciary duties in general is to focus on delivering a set of benefits that are in the sole interest of those participants and the other beneficiaries, essentially employees and their families. And so that's where the real focus is. In the opening comment, I said that I was approaching this from a perspective of patient advocacy, and that's really it. Are people getting the benefits? Are they getting the care that they need in order to be healthy, in order to be productive employees, in order to be able to live their life and enjoy their families? And that's what I think the bigger picture is all about. And any employer that's interested in really delivering a benefit and being of highest value to their employees will be thinking about it that way.
Yeah, and you're right. That is so many steps to get from a dissatisfied employee all the way to a lawsuit, but there are certainly different challenges that can happen along the way that we like to bring out, that some of them are clinical considerations, others are financial, and really when it comes down to it, anything that's a financial barrier for a patient can also end up being a clinical barrier as well if they aren't able to access their medications. And so some examples of this is just that with the Stelara biosimilar launches, not all biosimilars are created equal. There are a lot of different prices across the board, even for similar products across different contracts or branded, unbranded. And it really can lead to something where it could mean very different things for members if they're having to have a $18,000 product covered on their plan versus a $600 Stargemza product, which is what we have on our SmithRx plan for these autoimmune products. And so it can really be a barrier to patients. And this is where we want to start, including more examples like this. And so with this drug category or others, Steve, can you explain why a contract touting rebate guarantees could actually result in higher costs and how that could impact things across the board, like a category like this with such variable pricing?
Yeah, it's super interesting. And well, first off, this example is hitting really close to home. When I really started focusing on pharmacy benefits about 3 years ago, it's because I got personally an autoimmune condition and was prescribed drugs that similar to this one, but actually even more expensive. And was on a high deductible health plan, and so was picking up the first significant piece of this. And part of that is with all employees, or not all employees, but all of the employees that are on high deductible health plans. They're paying up through their deductible, and they are paying a significant percentage of their paycheck. And it's a true burden. So, they're sick and they're paying the highest burden. You asked the question about rebates, and the thing about rebates that seemingly not that many people really realize is that it's your sickest employees that are essentially largely funding the rebates. And the way that works is that the way a rebate is funded is the PBM goes to the manufacturer and says, how much are you going to pay for us to put that on the formulary? And the number goes up and up. And the way that the drug manufacturer pays for it is by increasing the list price. So it's not a negotiated discount. It's actually, how do you find the right list price that'll hit the right rebate? Well, that list price is again what winds up on the bill for the sick employee. And so effectively, your sickest employees are paying for your rebates, and it's unethical, and it's probably not fiduciary aligned when, again, you're supposed to be doing something that's in their sole interest. And there's many other ways to solve that problem, and this slide is a perfect example. Go find the $600 biosimilar, not the $33,000 biosimilar, and everybody wins. Plan pays less, the patient pays less, and the only person or the only organization that doesn't pay less or win in that is the PBM that's probably taking a big portion of that home. And I saw statistic, and you guys probably have, even better statistics, than I've seen. But something coming out of the Drug Channel Institute that said today for the traditional PBMs that actually operate this way, 37% of their profits are coming from specialty drugs like this, and the ability to take that extra money from the rebate and the pricing differential, and put it to their bottom line. Again, at the total expense and out of the wallet of employers and their employees.
You've already mentioned a number of misaligned PBM practices. It's like, where are the incentives here? And rebate is a big one in contracts, but what other contract jargon are you seeing that's used to hide these misaligned PBM practices?
Yeah. Super interesting that you say that or ask that. So, two things have been really hammered on over the past few years. And, one is rebates, which, we've just touched on. And the other is pass through, and pass through, is used in a number of different contexts. But the primary one is essentially is any of the money that's being paid to the PBM passing through to the plan, or is all of it? And there's a lot of movement afoot on the part of some PBMs to recharacterize rebates and call them fees and a whole variety of things. And so again, they keep it rather than passing it on as a plan asset. We've touched on this whole issue of specialty drugs and driving 30% plus the profits, and so there's a lot of issues associated with vertical integration, where the drug or the PBM owns the specialty pharmacy, is manipulating the pricing at the specialty pharmacy, is driving business to the specialty pharmacy. They're steering, is a term, and so that drives a lot of these issues. And then the thing that is, we started using Contract X-ray and started to look at a lot of provisions, I guess, in conjunction with each other, is the rebates are often being used as to hold the plan sponsor hostage. And so, for example, if you decide that you want to just move one biosimilar, all right, and you want to take it out of the formulary and you want to figure out how to get it to the participant on a cheaper basis, that one move can cause you to lose all of your rebates and can cause the entire contract to be repriced. And so that's it's just holding you hostage, right? It's not commensurate with the difference in the economics. And we're also seeing similar kinds of things on termination, right? If it got to the point where that was just so egregious and you couldn't change anything, and that you need to change, just huge termination penalties, and part of that might come out of the rebate, part of that might just come out of again payments where they're actually trying to recapture lost profits, right? Not even amortized costs, but actual lost profits. And so all of those things together, between looking at rebates, looking at spread pricing, looking at data rights so that you can understand this, looking at audit rights so that you can verify it, and looking at termination rights, all intertwine into something that's really difficult to manage.
And that's a lot of moving pieces, all to try to showcase different drug prices in different ways. And even just this chart brings up a lot of questions. And so in terms of going from a legacy PBM where it could be any one of these different prices for the biosimilars, I think this is a great question for Alan, in terms of when people are used to seeing the discount-based and these big dollar drug prices and big rebates, and then they see something available for the same clinically similar drug for $600. What are the biggest misconceptions in terms of trying to explain why this is a new way that's often fixed fee-based, cost-based models rather than the discount-based models. And how are they able to compare it to their existing PBM contracts, or can they? How do you close that divide?
Yeah, that's a great question, Alyssa. And I think maybe the best way to answer it is to actually take a step back and think about kind of where we've evolved as an industry. And if you look at how plan sponsors and employers in particular have been conditioned to purchasing pharmacy benefit services from vendors, it really starts, when PBMs first started 30 years ago, where it was very much focused on selecting a pharmacy benefit manager based on their ability to negotiate with the supply chain and focused on discounts. And at the time, if you think about it, when I first got into the pharmacy benefit space, pharmacy benefits were maybe 10% of overall healthcare spend. And so it wasn't a huge point of focus. It was, kind of an afterthought. And I think there was this misconception that, claims costs are claims costs, and it's more or less like a tax, and there's nothing you can really do to differentiate or drive savings. And the PBMs, really more or less the big health companies or the legacy PBMs, took advantage of that and created a purchasing structure that was, again, focused on discounts, where their revenue streams were largely hidden, and employers were conditioned to think that the administration cost was nothing or very low. And everybody knows, right, in this day and age, especially with technology and social media, that like nothing is free, right? If you're using an app on your iPhone and it's free, they're probably stealing your data and selling it, and they're monetizing it in some form or fashion. And pharmacy benefits is the same way. If you have a legacy contract today that's based on discounts and rebate guarantees, and there's no administration fee, or there's a very low administration fee, then that's probably not the whole picture, right? Nobody does anything for free. There's a cost to service. And I think that's one of the largest hurdles that we have, and a lot of the challenger PBMs have, is we're having conversations with employers and plan sponsors as they're going through the purchasing process, is when you're purely looking at what we're showing you as a true disclosed admin fee on paper, it may look higher, but the reality is, in the case of SmithRx, this is our entire source of revenue. This is what we are making to be able to provide services to you. Whereas the counter to that, in kind of the old way of contracting with PBMs, you had no idea. And if you look at the Wall Street reports and what these companies are making from a profit standpoint, as Steve mentioned, I can promise you that they're making much more than what we're charging as our standard admin fee. And so I think that's the biggest, hurdle and misconception that's in the market today, is that, it's going to be more expensive using a pass-through or transparent PBM, when it's really not true. You don't have to pay a premium for transparency or to have an aligned partner.
You've brought up some additional key terms, and I think this is a great time for us to now talk about what are some actionable tools. And so this is so great to have Steve here today to go over what existing tools do you have for plan sponsors, and can you give us an example?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we've talked a few times about contract X-ray, and the history of contract X-ray was, Nautilus has been focused on developing standards and developing tools to implement those standards. And so we were approached by the National Alliance of Healthcare Purchasers to help them with some of the PBM procurement. And the first ask was, could you simply, help us with some RFPs and help us, make sure that we're asking the right questions of PBMs. And then, the natural next question was, can you actually help us with contract standards? And, everyone has viewed PBM contracts as being, overly long and complex and opaque and lots of fine print and lots of contradictory things between, various provisions and definitions and so on. And so we convened a group of about 30 different PBM experts, and from all corners of the industry, and benefits lawyers and PBM experts and so on. And we developed a list of about 30 different model contract clauses. And that's since, as this slide indicates, grown to about 35 or so. And it covers all fiduciary aspects, operational aspects, financial, clinical aspects of a PBM, and the kinds of things that you'd want in a contract. And so then, the CAA 2026 started looking like it was going to become law, and really bolster the fiduciary responsibilities and obligations of plan sponsors. And so we focused in on 10 key provisions that essentially create a contractual base for those fiduciary obligations. And then working with the experts, we built a scoring rubric that we could compare those provisions to the vendor contract. And for each of them, we could put a score against it and have some very defined and repeatable scoring metrics, so that we could score any contract and it would be very comparable across the contracts. And so that's really what we've called contract X-ray. And by putting it in a tool, we can make it fast and efficient and cost effective. And so, it's not our desire to put PBM lawyers out of business, but we can, read a contract and develop a very quick look, is one of the things we call it, within about a minute. And we can do a far more detailed review, getting all the way down into the details of not only developing a scorecard, but creating negotiating guidance. And this negotiating, guidance thumbnail that you see here is really the first of about 12 or 13 pages. And so for each of those 10 provisions, we'll tell you exactly what your contract says. We'll tell you what the model language says. We'll tell you what the difference between those means from a fiduciary perspective. And then we'll give you actual negotiating tips and talking points and the things that you ought to be bringing to your PBM, or giving to your lawyer, or giving to your benefits team for them to be able to guide their negotiation. And ideally, that's going to result in them changing their contract. And then we have some comparison tools that say, where did you start with? Where did you wind up with? What should you do next? And so all of that, again, if you were to find, a consultant or a lawyer, would probably, take you weeks and cost you thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars. And, we can do it in hours and do it, very cost effectively. And so that's really what we're trying to do. And from the very beginning, it was, build transparency so that we could shine a light on these opaque contracts, and then ultimately build accountability. And by accountability, what we really mean is, there's been so many terms out there like transparency, like pass through, like fiduciary alignment. And it's really marketing jargon, right? And it's been adopted by everybody. Even, I'll call them the worst offenders out there, would probably describe themselves, with those three terms. What Contract X-ray does is, with mathematical precision, we can determine, if a contract really is transparent or pass through or fiduciary aligned, and can, help you compare, one to the other in a way that the market has never been able to do before. And so that level of transparency, we think and we hope is going to really move the market. And that's what we've seen is, again, we started this with the National Alliance. They've made the Quick Look snapshot report available for free to all of their 45 or so coalitions, about 12,000 employer members. We're starting to build out, really significant database of contracts and PBMs that we've scored. We've scored about 30 PBMs at this point, or I should say more specifically, their contracts, right? Because we're not telling you, if they're a great PBM and they deliver on their results, but we are telling you if, how we think about their contract. And so of those contracts, we've seen the market moving. And some of the enlightened and forward-looking PBMs, like SmithRx, in all honesty, have come to us and said, "Hey, we know the market's changing. CAA 2026 is in place. PBM or the DOL is implementing PBM rules. The FTC has implemented others. It's created a roadmap. How can we create and evolve into a CAA 2026 ready contract?" And so SmithRx has done it. Others have done it. And every day we're getting more, coming to the table. And so the market is really moving, and we're able to describe what good looks like. And we're able to, I think create a really defensible difference between those who are embracing it and those who may be slower to. And so we're giving then plan sponsors, the ability to really do something different, right? So they can compare their current contract and go have a conversation with their incumbent, or they're going to be able to say, "Hey, I want to use this this list of forward-looking PBMs as my short list, and I'll send them an RFP, or I'll kind of test the market." Or whoever's on their short list, they can say, "Hey, please submit a contract, but we won't consider you unless you pass this standard." And so a lot of different ways for the plan sponsors to, again, for the first time, use a data-driven, evidence-based approach towards contracts.
And these contracts can be pretty lengthy, so it's great that you offer the snapshot just to get it started and more approachable.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what's funny, and Alan will weigh in. You talk about them being long. We've seen 150, 160 page contracts in some case, and in others are more reasonable. Um, I firmly believe that most companies have not read their contract, because there is no rationale for anyone to have signed a contract if they actually knew what was in it. And, they're really in many cases that egregious and really designed to protect the PBM, and almost in some cases, very little protection, for the plan sponsor. Right. And so that's part of what we've done here is, I know you can see the different colors, but it's essentially, report card scoring, right? 90 to 100 is great. And something under 60 is not good at all. And the vast majority, not the vast majority, but I will say the majority of contracts that we see, fall into that red flag under 60 scoring. And that just simply means, it's protecting the PBM, and doing a really good job of that, right? In a way that it handcuffs you and limits your ability to do what you need to do to support your fiduciary obligations.
Steve, it's great you mentioned, the complexity around contracts, and that, many employers more or less probably haven't read, or if they have, they didn't fully understand it as they're reading it. And I think, going along those same lines, I love that you mentioned the CAA 2026 as well, because I think an important aspect of that reform is, sometimes it's known as PBM reform, but it really isn't PBM reform under the context of, making the bad guys be better, and reining them in and changing their business practices by any means. I think if anything, it's arming an employer or a plan sponsor with a flashlight to somewhat look into the black box and see what's happening, which, if you think about it, it actually more or less puts more kind of fiduciary risk on the plan sponsors now, because now they're armed with data and they need to do something about it. And so I think that's where this contract X-ray fits in perfectly, because it's, it helps provide more protection to them, and ensures that they're, in a fair, safe contract with their vendor or their partner, in a world where they're now going to be armed with more data and have more information that they need to act on. And if they're not acting on it, we've seen what happens with lawsuits and, employees kind of being fed up with the status quo.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And, spent a lot of time thinking about, writing about it, consulting around compliance and fiduciary responsibilities. And, you hit on a really important point, is that, a lot of this, does put the burden on the plan sponsor, right? They're the fiduciary. And the way to get to a good result is through a diligent process and applying, prudent decision making at each step in that process. And those are actually two words that ERISA uses to define fiduciary duty, right? Diligence and prudence. And so that means that, you need to have a process, right? And the process needs to be documented. And ultimately, when you're making decisions, around this, that you've got a decision making framework that you can point to that was applied that ultimately drove your decision. And that's absolutely what Contract X-ray and some of the other RFP, RFI materials that we've pulled together is to create a diligent procurement process. And part of what I would say, just even backing up a little bit, is the problems that we're in, everything that we're talking about right now, I think is because of lax compliance leading to a lack of diligence in a procurement process, right? And so, just do the basics. You now have a contract X-ray. You can look at contracts. You can specify a minimum floor in the contract, and if you do that, you're almost halfway there. And Alan, the very first conversation that you and I had, and the quote that stuck with me was, all of this is a whole lot easier and a whole lot better if you're just fishing in the right pond. And that's what this is about, right? Is, score these contracts. The ones that score really well are basically, the good pond, the right pond, and go fishing there. And you're going to come up with a good result, and you're likely to have a fiduciary, aligned partner who's going to, support your obligations. And it's going to be a whole lot easier because they're only getting paid through admin fees, and you're going to have all the data you need and all the audit rights to examine and verify and prove that. That's what leads to great procurement.
With all of these examples and like this great scorecard and everything, what's the most frequent or surprising thing that HR leaders realize about their contract after running the X-ray?
Well, I'll tell you an interesting anecdote is there was a company out there that's known for having a really well run HR function and a really top-notch leader. And they signed a contract in late last year that was going to go in effect on January 1st. And of course, CAA 2026 is signed shortly after that, right? And so they brought their contract to us, and we scored it, and it didn't score very well at all, right? In literally in the 50s. And the thought was like, what is this? We hired a consultant, and, we thought we did a good job, but we only scored in the 50s. So two things is one, is again, the market has moved on. CA 2026, even though parts of it don't phase in until 2029. It's all fiduciary best practice. It's a roadmap, and you didn't implement all of those things, and so that's not helping you. The other thing I would say is the contract X-ray only measures what's in the contract. Doesn't measure marketing, doesn't measure the sales deck. It's only what's explicitly in the contract. And, I mentioned the rubric, earlier. If it's not mentioned, it scores a 0. Right. And the assumption is that, if it's not mentioned, a PBM can take advantage of it. Right. And so, you get a 1 if it's mentioned, but it's, written against you. And then you get a 5 if it meets our model language. And so, there was just a lot of stuff that was, maybe mentioned in the, in the sales deck, or maybe, assumed, from the business model. The other thing I would tell you is, and we're gonna publish this soon, is back to transparency, fiduciary alignment, and pass through. Is I mentioned that we measured all of those things. we've developed a heat map. And again, it measures each of those terms and the provisions that lead up to it. And, some of the companies, organizations that call themselves, pass-through PBMs, don't do real well on transparency, don't do real well on disclosure, don't do real well on, some of the other audit rights, data rights, and termination rights. And so it's like, again, the couple of the things that the market looks at, they do okay. All the other things, the contract is just, it's lopsided against the plan sponsor. And I think that's, it's the biggest surprise, right? Is that, again, marketing does not necessarily translate to great contracts.
That's exciting to hear what else Nautilus has coming. What else are you all preparing to launch?
Well, I'll hold it up next to my face and maybe it comes through. But, one of the things that we see as, problematic in the marketplace is that it's full of middlemen. And there are middlemen between plan sponsors and every component of their plan. And it's not just PBMs, but it's medical care, hospital care, you name it. There's a middleman out there, and probably some of the biggest middlemen are the brokers who are sitting there and guiding and advising clients. And when we talked about that contract probably hasn't been read, in part it's probably because the broker said, I read it and it's good. Go ahead and sign it. Right. Uh, I think there's two things, I laugh a little bit, like what's the one thing that should, never be, in a contract? It's anything the PBM has written. That's kind of number one. And number two is, what's the last thing you ought to believe, right? And it's, any broker's assurance that contract is good, right? And it's just not. And so, our friend, Mark Cuban has been, really, vocal in the marketplace would be a kind way to say it, about that, about the middlemen and the things that they're doing and what, executives need to do. And so I was able to get Mark's permission to use his public quotes in this book. And the way that I joke is we took all the profound ones and we left all the profane ones out. But we've built this book as not a PBM expose, but as a leadership book. And the idea is that, we're going to try and get it in the hands of leaders and, CXOs and board directors and people who probably have some fiduciary responsibility, whether they know it or not, and may not even be aware of this middleman problem, right? And so what we're hoping is that, the words of a billionaire will be able to, break through, get to these executives, help them quickly understand there's a problem and begin to catalyze and take action on it. And we hope the first action, they take is they turn around and they say, hey, go get this contract x-ray. Let's, pull our contracts. Let's take a look at them and see what they say. But so we're launching that, at the end of July in Rosetta Fest. And, with the National Alliance's help and everyone's help really is we're trying to get the book and we're trying to get contract x-ray, into the right hands and to really raise the visibility, in the marketplace so that we can go from, measuring, 30 or so PBMs to, 50 or 60 PBMs and hundreds, if not thousands of contracts and really build up the database and be able to, help the market move. And, the bottom line here is that, one PBM and one employer moving is good. But it's really collective action that's going to get the entire market to move. And that's what we're going to try to, continue to catalyze.
These are such great tools, and we will have a recap at the end for everyone for each of these resources Steve has brought. We do want to go through an example, and so in full transparency, we want to go through SmithRx's scorecard and give you an idea of what this looks like. And so, Steve, traditional PBM evaluation focuses entirely on discount spreadsheets. How does a modern scorecard or contract shift the focus towards actual costs and spend on the drugs and health outcomes?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned earlier, we're really measuring the contract and the infrastructure around that, right? And so hopefully, there's the idea that you're fishing in this ideal pond, and it's really scored. The rubric is around this idea that you really are transparent and pass through, and your only revenue sources are truly from admin fees, and that you will attest to that, and that you're going to be obviously able to disclose that. And what we're also asking for, and this also came from a National Alliance request, is more benchmarking data. And so, again, benchmarking data is hard to get, but at a minimum, the PBM should be able to tell you how you benchmark versus their book or to other similar organizations. And we're going to to be able to build up over time a benchmarking database. And again. There's all sorts of ways, as I think Alan touched on earlier, that the more traditional PBMs can bend their analyses, and it makes it really hard to compare apples to apples. But when you know what you paid on a PMPM basis last year, and what this proposal in front of you says your PMPM will be, then you've got a pretty good at least starting benchmark to work from. And then ultimately, the thing where the whole industry needs to go is not just contract, not just pricing, but needs to be looking at clinical outcomes, and what are the pathways and solutions that can ultimately drive a healthier workforce. And so that's part of where I'd say, or the roadmap around the scorecard. Start with the contract, nail down, more pricing, benchmarking, and then ultimately be able to look at what's going to drive outcomes. And that's not an easy thing. That's a multi-year thing. It's going to require a lot of data, and not just PBM data. And again, that's why things like CAA 2026 are so important. That I think Alan said earlier that that's not just PBM, but all of these covered parties, all of the people that have the data need to be able to provide it in a way that you can build a model to look at not only what your costs were, but ideally what your costs might be, right? More predictive models, and as they can get to that, then you have the potential to shape your plan, shape your benefits in ways that keep people healthier, or help them get healthy faster, if they have a condition. And just last thing I'll say, again, kind of back to my own personal patient advocacy. It took me almost 3 years to get diagnosed, to get on the right drug treatment, and then finally find one that, instead of almost killing me, made me better. And so anything that a PBM could bring to the table to make that process faster and better, I think will generate really great benefits, and will ultimately be extremely differentiating compared to those that just kind of have an admin function.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing your story, and that helps bring it back to what this is all about, is that while these are big contracts and a lot to track, what it really comes down to is, can your employees access the right drug at the lowest cost so that they can be supported during those difficult times of diagnosis and trying to find the therapies that work with their providers. So I'm glad you were able to get there. So we can give an example then. Let's go through, how does SmithRx stack up in the contract x-ray, and what are some scorecard highlights?
Yeah. So first off, Smith needs to be commended for the way that you guys have embraced this whole idea of standards and moving towards CAA 2026 readiness and beyond. And so you guys have just been great partners in that process. I love what you said just a few minutes ago, Alyssa, about, getting, kind of the right drug. From the beginning, the mantra that you guys carried, through this, that we've described as a first principle is, how do you get the right drug to the right participant at the right price? And that's really, what this should be, all about. And, Smith scored extremely well across that whole process. And so the excellent piece and the readiness is excellent is really, first off, that you're, committed to the lowest net cost. And so you're not chasing rebates, and you're not trying to optimize the formulary based on rebates, and that you are, doing everything you can to make that as visible and verifiable as possible to clients. And so, based on your platform, you're providing data and have certainly the potential to provide the data on every payment that's been made to pharmacies, and ultimately, the plan, and make sure that, there's no spread pricing. You're able to provide a significant amount of data on rebates, and, proving that all of that is being passed on, and lots of data, around the admin fees, and just, making sure that all of that ticks and ties. Your audit provisions are, as good as any, or better than any, I should say, in the industry. And so the ability to look at all of that data, and question anything about it, and verify it, and be able to do that at something other than just a tiny little window, over a few days, by an auditor of your choice, right? Which is, another one of the restrictions that big PBMs put out there. All of those things, were rated excellent. And ultimately, we call this, fiduciary alignment, but your willingness and ability to say, that, through it all, you want to act in the as supportive as you can in the plan sponsors' fiduciary obligations, and to support what it is they need to do, is kind of the big umbrella, if you will, across all those kind of subpoints that I made, and comes across as very partnerial in the process. And so for all of those reasons, you guys scored excellent, and scored, CAA 2026 ready, which means that you're forward-looking, and you're implementing, things that may not be required by law, until 2029, but makes sense, for your clients, and you're doing it today.
Well, and thanks for going through the overview. And this is great to hear. Obviously, everyone likes to get ranked well and scored well. Alan, as you hear all these things from the components of the contract X-ray from Steve, what do you see that are key pillars of the SmithRx strategy?
Yeah, I think, it's been a great evolution working with Steve and Nautilus, and going through the evaluation process. I will say, as he was mentioning, it definitely was an iterative process as we were kind of submitting our initial contract and then going through the evolution. And I think what was an interesting learning for me as we were going through it is there's certain provisions that maybe we've had in the contract because it's just industry standard language that we didn't really feel strongly or passionately about, and we weren't trying to use it as a gotcha, or a way to not allow a plan sponsor to meet their fiduciary obligations, but it was more, something that was in there. And so it was a good, I think, reflection process for us to sit back at some of these that were highlighted through the contract X-ray process and say, what was our intent of this in the first place? 10 years ago when we initially started SmithRx and we put our initial kind of boilerplate contract in place, what were we trying to accomplish with this? And in a lot of those cases, it was, this is just how it's always been. And so it was in there. And so it was very easy for us, I think, to go through those iterations and remove some of the pieces. And I think what's great about Nautilus and the contract X-ray, and Steve touched on this a little bit, is what's interesting is the market has really, as I was mentioning before, been ingrained to think of this idea as, a PBM's offering is, hugely financial based. And there's a ton of focus if you look at a pharmacy consultant or a broker and they're going through kind of an RFP procurement process. 80 to 90% of that decision is focused on like these financial guarantees. And those financial guarantees become very squishy due to the contract language, like Steve mentioned, that's, very much in favor of the PBM. And the challenge with that, and what's great about Nautilus is it's helping move the industry in the right direction, where if you have a strong contract in place with alignment and accountability, proper accountability in the contract, where there's no spread pricing from rebates or pharmacies. There's the PBM doesn't own any assets in the supply chain. They don't own pharmacies and they don't own drug manufacturers or the making of drugs. Their admin fees are their only source of revenue. There's no forked price list. They're not subsidizing one client or another. Real-time supply chain improvements can take place, or, most importantly, the client owns their own data. There's no proprietary data because it touched our systems. And if you're able to have those provisions in the contract, the financial kind of accountability framework becomes almost less important, because the claims costs then become the claims cost. And if the contract can ensure that the PBM is always working in the client's best interest and getting patients to the lowest cost source of supply, that accountability framework that's today focused, largely on financial guarantees, more or less becomes a wrapper. And whether it's a PNPM guarantee or a percent reduction or a trend guarantee or a traditional discount and rebate guarantee, that wrapper shouldn't really matter, because the contract provisions make it so that the PBM is going to operate the same regardless of what that wrapper looks like. And it's a hard concept that's very different than kind of how the industry is thinking. But what, again, contract actuary does is establish that framework. Because step one is, okay, I need a contract that doesn't allow the PBM to play games, which the contract actuary does. And then step two of that is like, okay, now how do I financially evaluate the PBMs that are in the right pond, as Steve was mentioning? And that comes then with, the work that they'll be doing with benchmarking and looking at costs of medications and, the PBM's ability to provide higher levels of service.
This has been such a great discussion, and I know Alan and Steve are both very active on LinkedIn. So if you aren't already, please follow them on LinkedIn. We also have an email, full disclosure at smithrx.com, where you can request any additional information as well. And so we want you to have all these resources as well. So check your inbox and you'll be getting some follow-ups from the webinar today. Again, thank you, Steve and Alan, for joining us today, and thank you to everyone watching. Hope to have you join us next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alyssa.